But it's really my privilege to introduce to all of you someone who needs no introduction, which is Jyoti Bansal. He's had an incredible journey in enterprise software, being the founder of not one, but three amazing enterprise software companies. AppDynamics, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, and is a category leader in application performance monitoring. Harness, which is a new emerging disruptor in the CI/CD space, and Traceable, which is a new challenger company in application and API security. So, there's a good reason why we teasingly call him the Elon Musk of enterprise software. And last but not the least, he's also the co-founder of Unusual Ventures, where I'm super honored to be a partner and get to collaborate with Jyoti. So I'm really, really excited to be here together, and hopefully, we'll be able to have a conversation that's very helpful to everybody in this audience. We'll be going through some questions, but then we'll, also have time for Q&A. And I'm going to keep a track for, I'm going to track who asks the best question or can make Jyoti laugh. That can be our bar. All right, so with that, this was kind of the biggest question I asked Jyoti the first time that I met him, which is, if you go back to 2017, AppDynamics was acquired by Cisco. Jyoti finally has free time and a young family, and is a billionaire. Amazing success. Jyoti, what motivated you to think about starting another company and being a founder again?
Yeah, it's a good question, and when AppDynamics was acquired in 2017, and it was a big acquisition and everything, it's the first instinct I had, which made sense, was that I don't need any more money. I have more money than I could ever spend in my life. I've achieved good amount of success. So I should retire and enjoy what I do, right? So I went on a retirement for about 6 to 8 months, and we had a list of things on our checklist of we wanted to do, like safari in Africa, we wanted to go and trek in Bhutan, we wanted to see Machu Picchu, see fjords in Norway, and all, like, this was a list of things that, like, when I was running AppDynamics, I could never get to because I didn't have time to do any of that, right? So we went to do all of those. But in about 6 to 7 months, we were done. It's like my wife and I, and we're like, what now? I can't be doing this all my life. And I started to look at, like what, at some point in life, you think of, if you don't have to worry about money, you don't have to worry about your career success, whatever it is, right? You should be doing what you enjoy. So I looked at, okay, what do I enjoy? And I realized that I really enjoyed the journey of building a startup. So, I'm at the core of it, I'm a product guy. I love building great products. But then, you can't build just great products. You have to combine them with building great teams, and then that builds a great business, right? I enjoyed that, the hustle of it, the competitive element of it, the building the team, the competing in the market, all sort of things that come with a startup. And I was like, okay, that's what I enjoyed. Why should I do it again? Like, who cares what the outcome or anything could be, but that's what I enjoyed. I will do it again. The second part is the problem itself, like what Harness does and what Traceable does, right? Because that's also important. Like, I didn't seek out I want to start a second company, so now let me go and hunt for problem ideas or, ideas to do that. Right? These were problems I was very passionate and excited about, even when I was at AppDynamics. So, like, the what Harness does about, like, I always thought it was kind of horrible that there are only like maybe 10 companies in the world who are very good in software delivery. Where, like, CI/CD software delivery, they're shipping code very fast, and these are like your Googles and Facebooks and Amazons and Netflix, and they had this massive advantage over everyone else in the world, who was all struggling with DevOps, CI/CD, software delivery, and said someone got to solve that. Like, so I wanted to solve that even before AppDynamics was acquired by Cisco. So to me, that was a problem that was exciting as well. So it was that same applies to my latest company, Traceable. How we should think about securing every line of code in the world. We all look at, like, all the world runs on code, so the code has to be secure. That's also a problem I wanted to actually solve, and I was passionate about even when I was at AppDynamics, 3-4 years ago now. So it's the combination of like, this is what I enjoy to do, I would want to do it.
Right.
Retirement is not really that fun after a while, and these are problems that excites me to solve, and that's the genesis of it. Same thing applies to unusual ventures as well. Like, unusual also stemmed from a problem I wanted to really solve, which is like, how do we rethink early stage investing, and how do we make it more really useful for founders, when we do that.
Right.
And I experienced that and I wanted to solve it. So it's like, if you want to solve a problem, that becomes, why not do it, right?
Right, right. It's, the authenticity that you can't stop thinking about the problem. Like, you're not starting something just to start something. It's because can't stop thinking about this even while you are in Machu Picchu, right? And I think, so many of us don't appreciate that enough when you're thinking about like what really motivates you. I guess here's a really important question. um, did any of it get easier the second time around? Like, one really hopes that some things got a lot easier. What would you say, when you started working on Harness, like what felt easy this time?
I think some things do get easier. I think the most important is fundraising and dealing with investors. When I started AppDynamics, this was when I was sort of an engineer turned first time entrepreneur, first time CEO. I never even managed a single person in my life before that. I was in my late 20s, and I had this idea for what to do in AppDynamics, and raising capital was quite hard for me as at that time. And it just, I pitched about 20 VCs, who rejected me before I got any funding for AppDynamics. The Harness, doing it the second time, was exactly the opposite of it. Like, VCs didn't even know what we were doing, because we were in stealth, and there were at least 20 people who were willing to give us like offers and term sheets, and VCs just knocking on like,
Right.
our money. And I bootstrapped the company initially. We didn't even need any capital, but there was still like, the fundraising part of it was so so different. It was kind of almost funny to watch. Like, and I live in San Francisco. When I was doing AppDynamics fundraising, almost all VCs used to be in Sand Hill Road, Menlo Park, and every day I would used to drive down and meet VCs and pitch to partnerships and all. For Harness, like, the firm we went with, the entire partnership came to our small WeWork office in San Francisco to kind of pitch to us and take their money. So it's like that dynamic changes, right? The second part that also becomes much easier, that kind of goes into that, the second time you get a bit of luxury to work with the investors and board members that are the right kind of partners, uh, and that completely changes how you work with your investors and board. Now, to me, one of the I would say things from AppDynamics was that I spent a lot of time managing our board and investors. Like, maybe about 20 to 30% of my time would go in there. We had all sort of investors who needed just a lot of management. Uh, Doing it second time at Harness, it's much easier. I spend maybe 1 to 2% of my time managing investors and the board. A part of it is also like, it's just a bit of a psychology in the investor world. Like, when I was first time CEO, people were like, his first time CEO, and people would doubt and question all the things all the time. You have an exit, and the next day, you start a company, you're second time CEO now. And just psychologically, now everyone thinks you're expert on everything, because now you're second time CEO. So even though you are really the same person, but just like, so that does make things a bit easier on that front. I would
Right.
say, yeah, that's the fundraising becomes easier, managing the board gets easier. I think the other thing that does get easier is, what to expect. You can see around the corners better, because you've gone through the journey. Like, when like, I could see 6 months ahead, a year ahead, based on the prior experience of building it the first time at AppDynamics. And AppDynamics, everything was new. Like, I didn't know what will happen a year later, what will happen 2 years later, and things don't exactly happen the same way at Harness now, but still there's a lot of similarity, right? So, like, once you're gonna hit, your 100 customers, these are kind of the challenges that will start to happen. Like, once you start getting, like, expand your sales force internationally, these are the challenges that will start to happen. So you could be prepared for those. Also know, like, these are the things that will happen when, like, when you go from one product to second product. These are the things you have to do on the how you structure your engineering. These are the things you need to do when you, like, structure your sales organization, how do you launch a product, some of the things that like, I I didn't know what to expect first time. Second time, I know much better what to expect. So that makes it much easier, to plan around and execute on bunch of these things.
Right. Well, what was an example of something that like was a surprise for you when you were first building AppDynamics? Like where you were like, oh shit, I didn't see this coming at all.
Mhm.
Or maybe, I had vaguely heard about it, but didn't realize that it would be such a big deal. And, wish I knew this 6 months ago.
Yeah, like, when I was first doing AppDynamics, almost everything was a surprise to me because I didn't know anything. Like, even like simple things like, okay, how do you even interview a sales rep? I have no idea, like, what to ask, a sales rep in an interview question, and like, how do you, so those kind of things were all you learned through it, right? So those almost everything was a surprise. At Harness, like, I do think like some things, like these skills you have learned, like, like, some of these things are not as surprises. When I was building AppDynamics, to me, like, how to handle sales was definitely, I'd never thought it would be that hard or that complicated, but
Right.
kind of figure it out what to do, scaling the teams and how do you, like, build the right culture. I was, I never thought of that, like, at AppDynamics until we kind of starting to have to deal with it, right? But at Harness, I know, like, you have to be much more proactive about building the right culture very early on. So those kind of things, you are not surprised anymore. Like, I know these I have to do because that's that,
Right.
otherwise you can't really grow.
Makes sense. All right. So to recap a little bit, you said that things that got easier, fundraising. You can get VCs to pitch you on why you should accept their term sheet and offer. Sounds great. Everyone should just skip to being a second-time founder and just skip the first-time bit. Managing your board, making sure you work with people that you trust and understand, and don't need managing. And knowing what to expect. I think those are really solid challenges that if they are easier, like feels like as a founder, like your life is in a much better place. But what about like core company strategy? Like for example, you brought up that hey, when you're a second time founder, people don't question your decisions as much because you have done this before. Like even if you are the same person, you're thinking like the same way about your company strategy, people kind of trust you that you know it. Is that part easier, or like what is it that is equally hard, I guess?
What is equally hard is executing, executing on a few things, like, and finding product market fit, for example. Like, when I was doing AppDynamics, initially I had assumptions on this is how our product should be, this is how what the market need be, and turned out that half of those assumptions are wrong. And we had to do multiple pivots in the first 18 months of AppDynamics, right? And you have to iterate and pivot and find the right product market fit. And most startups have to go through that. So when at Harness, I thought like, okay, I'm doing it second time. Maybe I'll get all my assumptions right the first time, but that's really not the case. The finding that product market fit is still the same iterative process. Like, we had to pivot at Harness as well. We have to do like, some of the assumptions were wrong and we have to pivot and correct course and, iterate through it and go through almost exactly the same journey that we went at AppDynamics, right? So which is like, how do we hone into the right product market fit? And it was equally hard. It's a hard problem to solve. It was a hard problem to solve at AppDynamics. It was a hard problem to solve at Harness. And that was one. Second is I would say equally hard is recruiting. And that was a little bit of a surprise to me actually, because I thought like at AppDynamics, we spend a lot of time recruiting, and I strongly believe that to build a great company, you have to hire a lot of good people, and kind of as founders, you have to spend a lot of time personally trying to recruit, right? So in AppDynamics, we hire a lot of really great people, and a lot of those people like became like people who started as engineers become VPs, and people who started as sales reps and sales directors, they became like head of sales and all. Like people grew with the company for over 5 years, 8 years, 10 years even, right? So I thought initially like I could just go and bring all those people who I knew who like really
Right.
rock stars and kind of grew with AppDynamics, and I don't need to spend time on recruiting. But that turned out that's not the case, because most of those people, it's great that they've been now significantly, grown in their careers and where they are
Right.
in their journeys in work, right? So for them to come into a very early startup, many times doesn't make sense. Like, why would you come to a very early startup? It's not the right fit. It took me some time to realize that I need to actually go through the same cycle again, that find these really talented upcomers, very similar to what we did on AppDynamics, and kind of groom them and have them grow with the company. And then they become the next generation of those rock stars, the way we had at AppDynamics. I couldn't just bring all of the same people and, I have to go through the same journey again. So that was, I think it's equally hard in the sense that I had to put equal amount of effort, that we did in AppDynamics at Harness as well, right?
Right.
I would say the
How do
third
you,
part.
I'm curious, I'll interrupt you a little bit, because, how do you think about identifying that like next, rising star, right? Like if you can't just like, maybe, your old team wants to spend more time in Machu Picchu than you did. Now you need to like find like, that person, but 10 years ago. Do you have like, because I know you have such cool frameworks for all decision making, like how do you think about like, yes, this person is like a founder level hire and I'm catching, her or him early?
I think the framework that I like to use is like, someone who is, first of all, high intellect. They have to be high intellect is important. Second is they are very curious. They're curious and they want to learn, and they are fast learners and they're curious about learning more and more. And third, they're ambitious, that they want to do that. Like they have the desire to, to grow. They have the desire to, do bigger things. Like, if you want to have like, a person who, let's say you're hiring as a sales rep, that they are like, they are high intellect, they are curious and fast learner, but they're ambitious, that they want to become a VP of sales at some point, so now, like, they have all the right ingredients at least, right? So, could they be coached and mentored and kind of they could get there over time? They can. So that's how I would identify things. But it also goes through a process after that. Like not everyone makes it. Like you can't not, it's like if you hire 5 of those people, you think, okay, these are high potential. Not all 5 are going to get there. Like, so it almost also goes through a sort of a meritocracy process after that. Like, the best people get promoted to the next level and the next level and the next level. So you go through that cycle, we did that very well at AppDynamics. And I initially thought I can short circuit that at Harness. It's actually a great cycle because it allows so many people to grow with the company. And, so that's you have to do that again.
Right. And you talked about how you had to learn a lot about sales with AppDynamics. So how did that go with Harness and Traceable? Like any shortcuts to hiring good salespeople and hitting your quota every year or every quarter?
Well, there are 2 parts of sales. In the initial years, there's a lot of hustle, and there is always a bit of hustle goes in sales. But the initial years there's much more hustle than you would imagine, right? And actually, I initially thought when like doing it second time that we don't need to hustle as much, But like when it was like the early days of AppDynamics, like every deal doesn't matter. It was like $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, like whatever it takes. We'll if I have to be involved, I will be on the front line trying to close the deal, win the deal, everything, right? But as the company got mature at AppDynamics, you have a sales machine. Like, you have an entire machine that, you actually don't want it to be hustle oriented. You want it to be more systematic because the hustle doesn't scale at some point, right? So I got very used to that machine, right? So when I started Harness, initially I thought, okay, we probably don't need the hustle because machine is great, like, but you realize in the first couple of years, the machine is, doesn't really work. You got to still hustle a lot. And, and that part, you can't really avoid it. Like, so at Harness, like, it's really the same kind of things we had to go through as well. Like, if it's doesn't matter if it's like, to win, how small a customer is, how small a deal is, you have to do everything to win. You have to, prospect, your way in, you have to like, beat competitors. All of that sales hustle you still require. Like, you really can't, like, whatever it takes to help your sales teams and your sales reps to like just get one small competitive advantage to win. So it becomes really, really important in the first couple of years, right? So that still remains the same. I think when it comes to like, if you want a repeatable sales motion where like, you never miss a quarter, That
Right.
happens only when you build a repeatable sales machine, right? And every startup has to kind of evolve into that. Like, you start with the hustle oriented sales to like, a little bit of hustle and a little bit of machine to like almost a complete machine oriented model at some point, right? Where like, it's everything is predictable, repeatable, all of that. And you go through that cycle. Yeah. I have a little bit of an advantage doing it the second time now at Harness, and and traceable, that like that is coming, like and
Right.
that we have to go towards it. At AppDynamics, I didn't know it initially. I was like, hey, this hustle thing is working so well. Why do we even need to think about building a machine until I start running into problems with it, right? So at
Right. Right.
Harness, like we can start building which we have done, like building a very predictable kind of sales machine, a bit earlier than most startups would do.
Right. Yeah, and at Unusual, like we definitely find that just building the sales machine and getting the senior sales leader hire right is just so challenging for founders, especially doing it the first time. And that's why we've built so much support for them, like where we can like help them pick that right person. And I remember, I think this was like maybe 2018. I remember reading this amazing article that you had published about what you learned from AppDynamics about hiring sales leaders, especially at that pivot point of like going from having a sales leader who manages to deals to having a sales leader who manages to sales capacity.
Mhm.
And like running a machine that's capacity based, and a leader who thinks about capacity as opposed to a leader who thinks about individual deals. And it really felt like very, very good hard won wisdom that you can, and the funny thing is you can't really hire the capacity leader early, right? Because that's not the person you need early. Like you actually do need the person who can get in there to close individual deals. So yeah, I think that was like just an amazing way to synthesize what you probably learned over years of hiring at AppD, and very useful for founders.
Yeah, I think it's some of the things that you have to do in the very early stage, like getting from that idea to the first $1 million of revenue. Those things, I think it's it doesn't matter how much experience you have, they remain equally hard,
Right,
and you just have to
right,
do them. Like the manage the sales deals, and recruit the initial team, and go and get the right messaging. And as you know, Sandhya, at Unusual, that's a key part of our focus on how do we help founders in a very systematic way, just help, not just giving them advice, but can we just go in the trenches and be the extended sales force, and be the extended recruiting force, and be the extended marketing arm to do that. Because that's really hard to do. I think at some point when you start hiring the right, that you can attract the right leaders, in your company as VPs, things get easier. Like so
right, right.
that's always the initial challenges, and you have to go through. There's no shortcut to it.
Makes sense. All right. So to quickly recap, some of the things that you said, unfortunately, continue to stay hard. Finding product market fit, recruiting really, really good rising star talent, because the team from your first run might not be the right fit to like join you at on day zero again. And the sales hustle, right?
Mhm.
Can never stop hustling. Really need to be like super, super hands on deck in the early phase of building your company, which resonates a lot. And so, we've talked a little bit about what got easier, what got hard. What about surprises? Like, what would you say was, maybe like month 2 of harness? What was for you like, oh, I was really not expecting this. What just happened?
uh, yeah, there are always some surprises. Like I think most of the surprises to me were more at a personal level. Like I think the number one is like when I was last at AppDynamics, we are about 1,000 plus employees. We have a few $100 million of revenue, and you start operating at a much higher level, right? You're not into the day-to-day details. You are much more at a strategic level, right? So you're operating at that 100 feet to 1,000 feet kind of level. And when you start a company like the Harness, the first few, say the first few months, you have to go down to that 1 feet level, and and start operating at that again, right? And that's a little bit of a I kind of knew that that's what you have to do. But still, it was a surprise to me, like, adapting to it and adjusting to it, it takes some time. Like, you have to deal with like really small things on, like, do you have, you know, you're hiring an engineer, to start tomorrow, and do you have the, a desk for them, right? It's as something like that, you will have to like operate, like, because there is really no one else. You have to take care of things, and kind of the job that happens in early stage, where as founder you wear every hat, you do everything that whatever needs to be taken, like, you have to be the plumber for that day, because office is flooding, you gotta still do it, right? And still a bit of an adjustment, that was a little bit of a surprise to me, that you got to operate down at the at the 1 foot level. I would say the second surprise is also a bit of a sort of a personal adjustment, which is the realization that there is really no shortcut. Like, if you have to go through a journey, like, like the startup journey, like in the say the B2B kind of space, right? You start with an idea. It takes like, somewhere in the 12 to 18 months to find your initial product market fit, your initial set of customers, and then you start building a sales team, and then you go and you go to $1 million of ARR, and $10 million of ARR, and $25 million of ARR, and 50 million, and 100 million. But those are all it. You have to just go through it, and there will be challenges and hiccups and big obstacles sometimes through all of those. Right? There is no shortcut. And mentally, I had to prepare myself. I had to ask myself, actually, especially in the first 6 months, a year, that am I pushing the org to go too fast? Because I wanted to get, like, because I was running a much bigger company before, right? So almost like you think of, you want to get there as soon as we can, but there is no shortcut to get there. You have to go through the journey, and even if we go there very fast, and Harness, I would say, is on track to be among the fastest companies to reach many of those kind of revenue milestones, even in the SaaS kind of world. But still, you can't go any faster, right? So so I had to like stop myself on, like, I can't keep pushing my team to go any faster. It's like there's no shortcut. You have to go through all of the grind, right? And that's like, it was a bit of a surprise that I need to go through that kind of a personal mental adjustment around that.
Makes sense. And do you remember were there like clear mistakes that you had made at AppDynamics that you're like, yes, definitely not doing that again. I'm going to do things differently here, that worked out well with Harness?
Yeah,
other than the whole investor management thing, not.
Well, investor management, I would think, is probably the biggest one. Like, it was it could become a drag otherwise. Like, so, definitely that's a mistake I wanted to avoid. Like, how we have the right, pick the right investors and how we manage them. So I'm pretty happy with that. But I think if you look back at most companies, like if I look back at AppDynamics, successful outcome, everything, the mistakes mostly come down to two categories, right? Either you make some kind of strategy mistakes of, like, you didn't go into a use case or a product area or some adjacent market or something fast enough, and you let some competitors go there faster, or you kind of didn't change or pivot, some product strategy somewhere soon enough or something, right? That's like the more of the, and a lot of them fall into the product strategy, go to market strategy, kind of, you made some wrong decisions, or you didn't correct your decision fast enough. The second category of mistakes almost always come into people, right? That you didn't hire the right person, or you kind of like, didn't change a person soon enough, or you kind of like, so it's, when I look back at AppDynamics, like, the mistakes come down into two buckets. Like, it's the, so, at Harness, obviously, like, I try to avoid those mistakes. You still cannot get everything 100% right. Like, it's just impossible. Like, but it's, but we try, I look at, like, can we reduce the mistakes, and can we reduce the time to correct mistakes, right? So it really comes down to those two things, right? So, like, we are just a, little bit more conscious about, keep studying where the market is evolving, so that we are not like in AppDynamics, like, there are a few things we missed out, like, when we, like, say, how fast everything moved to mobile apps, for example, right? So the mobile APM, we were at least a year behind in market at AppDynamics, because we were, we were just not paying attention enough to it, right? And then we had to catch up and like build a good mobile APM, for mobile apps a year later. At Harness, we try to avoid those mistakes by, like, having much more dedicated focus on, what are the things where the market is going. Are we constantly listening from our customers? Are we, and are we constantly also listening to like what are the other trends going so we can avoid some of those kind of mistakes? Like people, the same thing, like, it allows us to, do slightly better. But, you know, in reality, it's impossible to not make mistakes. Like, because you have to move really slow. If you startups, you're moving fast, and sometimes you just have to decide and keep going, right? And you correct from later if something was wrong. So I only look at like, can I reduce the rate of mistakes? Then we'll be fine.
Right. Yeah. I think one thing that really stood out to me in what you said is this idea of like when you're heads down building your company, sometimes you forget to look at what's happening outside the building. You're so focused on like what's going on inside the building in your little world that you don't even realize that there is a bigger opportunity or like a market shift happening outside that world that you would actually be perfectly positioned for. So it's important to make sure there are people who can, nudge you when they see that happening, and people who can make sure that you don't miss it. So really, really good advice. Well, so you said that Harness is growing really fast. You guys recently got valued at $1.7 billion, officially becoming a unicorn. How does it feel? Is there, is the sense of achievement the same for you and the team? How does it feel the second time around?
It's a good question. I think when AppDynamics achieved the $1 billion unicorn mark, this was 2014, 15, around that time, so 6, 7 years ago. It felt like being a unicorn was like sort of the pinnacle of success for a B2B kind of startup. And so we have achieved a big part of our journey when we became unicorn. That's what it feels like. That we have done big part of our journey. Now, the 7 years later, the world has shifted in very good ways, as in the sense that the opportunity and the market need for like products in this say called the developer tools, DevOps ecosystem, to like most of the business applications, SaaS, has become much bigger. So the addressable market is significantly bigger than what it used to be. So getting to say 100 million ARR and like you become a unicorn, that was like that was a big deal. Now I think the market opportunities are bigger. So like when we at Harness, when we hit $1 billion valuation as a unicorn, it feels like the journey is just starting. So it still doesn't feel like we have accomplished a big part of our journey, which was kind of a bit different at the time of AppDynamics. So that is a difference. So there's a obviously to our team, to everyone's credit, it's still very hard to build a $1 billion unicorn company.
Right.
But I think at unicorn these days compared to 7 years ago, you have so much more potential to do. And so that's a little bit of the in some sense, it's a great part that there's a lot more opportunity. The bad part is it comes with that expectation. Like I call it like the decacorn is the new unicorn now. Like what used to be,
right.
$1 billion was a special part, and now it's like you got to be $10 billion to be really special as a company these days.
Yeah, like getting that top percentile, given I think the market has accelerated so much in its growth. Yeah, it's funny. I think one of the things that drives a lot of us as founders and folks in the software industry is we always want to be at the top of the game, and this is the new top of the game. So it's a great question to ask yourself, which is what level are you operating at, and like what is it that you're going to celebrate. All right, well, so shifting focus a little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit more about Harness. And one thing that actually stood out to me is that if I think about these two companies, there are a lot of fundamental differences in how they are positioned. Like AppDynamics was an early entrant in the application performance monitoring space, and you guys built an amazing enterprise top-down sales engine. I still hear people who talk about like that 5-minute demo that you could like walk into the company and do. And I remember telling someone, oh, like, yeah, which product marketer came up with this? And they would say, yeah, his name was Jyoti Bansal. So kudos to that. But then Harness feels like it's in a different environment, like you're disrupting a very big existing category. as opposed to like being the early like category definer, you're a disruptor. And the go-to-market motion might also be different. So would love to hear more about that. Like, how would you contrast like the positioning and go-to-market strategy for these two?
Yeah, the one similarity is that both AppDynamics and Harness are in the broader developer tools, DevOps ecosystem kind of space, right? But the big difference is, as number one, as you outlined, is the at AppDynamics, we were really defining the market. AppDynamics and a few companies of what application performance monitoring APM market would be. It was still very early and being defined. And Harness, people are doing CI/CD today. People are doing DevOps today. So and so we are going to the market and creating something that is like significantly disruptive and much better way of doing it. The interesting thing is like the our competition about 90% of the time is people building it themselves, right? So we are so it's because they were not really good products to do this. So most of the time people are doing it like using some solutions and then kind of doing it on top of it themselves, putting a lot of work and effort. So we have to design our product like the bar becomes much higher when you are going into a new market. You even your V1 bar doesn't have to be that high because something is better than nothing. But when you're going in an existing market where most people have a way to solve the problem already in some ways, like either homegrown or commercial or whatever it is, right? Your bar for your V1 is like you have to be at least 5x, 10x better than the existing approaches. So that becomes your first major difference compared to, when you just look at the product strategy and what the product market fit would be. Because it's a much different bar to start just as a starting bar. Right? The second thing is the go-to-market model. It it is significantly different in AppDynamics versus Harness for two reasons. One is I think over the last 7-8 years, especially in the developer tools kind of space, much more power and influence have shifted to the practitioner to the developer level. Like in AppDynamics, we were very well known as a very, you know, really, really world-class top-down enterprise sales motion, right? But so what we would do there is we would go to the senior level execs, VPs and C levels, and we'll make the case on, we had a process called, business value assessment. Like, what is how do you do things today? What could be the new way of doing things with AppDynamics, and what is the business value you get? And we'll convince them, and they will do a trial and proof of concept, and then you go and sell to them. That doesn't work anymore, because if you just go to someone who's a decision maker, and unless you have got buy-in and already ground up adoption from developers and the practitioners, no decision maker wants to give a tool or a product to their teams to go and use it. Like, everyone, so it, because they are all scared, like, would they get adoption? Would it work or not, right? So you almost have to create this new go-to-market model, that, what I call sometimes we call it the pincer strategy, or like, sometimes we call it the sandwich model, that you go from the bottom and you go from the top both. That you have to go from the bottom to the practitioner themselves, so that there's a very easy freemium trial experience, open source kind of models that you can go to them, and these people are using your product and happy, and you still have to build the sort of the decision maker down, the top down sales motion, so that you can monetize it and still create the business value framework. And but you already have a lot of the risk removed around adoption, because your
Right.
users and developers are already using it. So it's definitely a different kind of go-to-market strategy than what we did at AppDynamics. And to do that, we also look at, like, we have to make sure that we are not focused completely on large enterprise, that we have a very healthy mix of SMB, mid-market, and large enterprise. So the
Right.
SMB mid-market keeps you honest in terms of, like, how easy and simple your product would be, like, how fast of a sales process you can do. Can you go to the developers and practitioners themselves? So at Harness, we do it differently, that, we look at, like, 40% of our business comes from SMB mid-market and 60% comes from large enterprise. At AppDynamics, it was 95% coming from large enterprise, and very small part will come from SMB mid-market. So we deliberately change the go-to-market strategy, so we can kind of address how the buying patterns today in the world of developer tools and DevOps are.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Is it so? Given those differences, like, what were some of the implications in terms of, like, when you were hiring the team, did you look for a different type of profile for your product team, for your sales team, maybe marketing? Like, what were the implications on hiring, given that the market dynamics and the go-to-market strategy was a little different?
I think it's a good question. The hiring becomes, you have to hire the right people who have that mindset. Like, so we
Right.
at Harness, we don't want to hire people who only knew or cared about top-down enterprise sales, right? We also wanted to bring a healthy mix of people who understood the sort of the bottom-up, community-driven, sales and marketing as well, right? And then you try to bring a healthy mix of that. Same thing from a product design perspective, right? And from a product design, you want to make sure that you have people who understand the the product led motion, and
Right.
you can design the product around that, in addition to people who understand what do large enterprises need to succeed, right? So we look at and sometimes you may not find the same person who understands both, so but you have to hire the people who at least have the so you can complete the set of experiences in your team.
Right. I'll actually take a question from our audience, which is very, very apt right now, which is, what are like the signals or signs that tell you, okay, you are ready to go from hustling for every deal to like having to build sales machinery? Like, what is that tipping point? What do you look for? And you say, okay, we're ready to get started on the machine.
Uh, well, I think the biggest is like where you are in terms of your revenue is, I think the getting to the first million of revenue, I would say is about 80% hustle and maybe 20% machine and process in there. Getting from let's say $1 million to $10 million of revenue will be about maybe, 60% hustle and 40% machine. When you start getting from 10 million to $25 million of revenue of ARR, let's say, then it starts to shift. It starts shifting from it's 70% machine and 30% hustle. And when you start getting from like 25 million plus, it becomes 90% machine, right? So there is
Right.
almost like the scale that comes with it, that, because initially you can't make a machine out of something until you don't even know what the formula is.
Right.
So initially you are in that process to find the formula. The 0 to 1 million, you're still finding the product market fit formula. You don't even know how to articulate your product, the value prop of your product, or what the use cases your product solves. So you're experimenting and finding. So you can't make a machine out of something that you're constantly experimenting. In the $1 to $10 million of phase, you're also experimenting your sales market strategy, your go-to-market strategy. I call it so your 0 to 1 is a product market fit phase, and $1 to $10 million is product market sales fit phase. How do you sell it? And you're still trying to figure out enterprise, SMB, bottom up, top down, SMB, all sort of things you're figuring out, right? So in that one also, you want to start building a machine, but not too much, because you're still experimenting. But after 10 million, you start switching gears to now most of things, to start building machine. After 25 million, you should, because you need to press the gas at that point and kind of grow fast, right? So you really want to make it much more repeatable. And during all of those phases, if you don't have the right people who can transition from that, 90% hustle to 90% machine, then you may have to change people as well, right? During the process.
Right. Awesome. So that was, a lot of really, really good advice for our founders. I think a lot of it applicable even to first-time founders. But, one of the questions that maybe we can wrap up with is, thinking back to your first-time founder days, like what would be advice that you give them? People who are just starting out on the journey, who are just like thinking about starting or have just started building something. What would be your advice to a younger version of yourself?
I think the number one advice I give to everyone is don't get frustrated. Startups are hard, and there is no straight smooth line. When people look at successful startups, and they sometimes think, these guys had it so smooth, why am I struggling with this, or why am I having this thing? And I tell them hey, everyone has their struggles. I'm now a 2 times unicorn founder, but I have struggled, and all their challenges at every step, and you just have to go through it and don't get frustrated about that. That's the normal part of building a startup. So that's, first time entrepreneur founder, that's don't get frustrated. The second thing advice I would give to folks is try to keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate it. I call it my 5-point simple formula of building a company. And my 5-point simple formula is starts with make sure your addressable market is large, or you're making it larger constantly. Because if you are operating in a small addressable market, doesn't matter how hard you work and whatever you do, you're kind of constrained by it. So an addressable market, sometimes people think that they can't control it. I strongly believe that you define your addressable market by expanding the use cases that you can address, etc. Right? So you have to constantly work on making sure your addressable market is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's one part of the first part of the formula. Second is my formula would be like build a good product. Like, if you build the product that is in the top three, ideally top one, top two, top three, like in your space, whatever problem you're solving, everything becomes so much easier. So like if you put a lot of energy and focus in doing that. Third to me is sales. Like, don't ignore sales and don't underestimate sales, and build the sales, from the hustle to the sales machine, and like invest time and energy in learning about sales and getting good at it, and working and helping your sales teams, etc. Right? Founders and entrepreneurs. I was a product founder entrepreneur. First time I was doing it, I was, initially I wasn't like, why should I care about sales? And that's, but it took me some time to learn it. But that's to me is like an important part of the formula of as a company, you have to become very good at it. Fourth is customers. Like, just take care of your customers, and not just lip service to it. Like, every customer matters. You do whatever it takes to make your customers happy and successful, and you make them happy and successful, and find a way to do that. And fifth part of my formula is culture. Like, don't underestimate, the importance of culture. You got to build the right culture. You would have to be deliberate about it as the founder, and you have to make sure you're setting the right tone for the culture. If you screw up the culture, eventually everything will fall apart. So I look at, like, my simple things. I only look at these five things. Like, are these five things happening? And when I run harness or I run traceable, like, are we on track on these five things? And if it's just a simple framework and I don't need to worry about much more, and then kind of things start to happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much, Jyoti, for your time. So really amazing session. So many pearls of wisdom. You sometimes you make it sound so easy, like 5-point framework for building a company. But each of those 5 points there's so much thought and learning behind it. And I think that's the fact that you are able to simplify it and articulate it like that for us is super helpful. I know a lot of this content will be available on YouTube, and we are all on Twitter. If you guys want to ask us more questions, like happy to keep going later. But for now, this will be the end of our session. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.